The stairwell bucked hard enough to throw helmets against concrete, and Captain J. Jonas felt the whole building move under his boots. In the dark, someone shouted that the staircase was twisting. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and every breath scraped. Jonas grabbed the railing and yelled for his men to stay together because the sound below them wasn't footsteps anymore. It was a deep, growing roar, like a freight train coming straight up the core of the North Tower. That morning began with routine for most people inside the World Trade Center. Then, at 8:46 a.m., a jet struck the North Tower. Inside, the impact tore through offices, severed communications, and filled stairwells with smoke and confusion. Some people heard instructions over the public address system that suggested staying in place, while others pushed immediately for the stairs. Firefighters and police flooded the lobby, and elevator banks were shut down. The only way out was down. Ladder 6 moved in with the same muscle memory they'd used for decades. Gear on, radios up, climbed toward the reports of fire and trapped occupants. Jonas and his crew forced their way upward through crowds of office workers coming down. People were sweating, coughing, clutching shoes in their hands. Some asked the firefighters if help was coming for those above. Jonas couldn't promise anything he couldn't deliver. He kept moving. On the way up, the smoke thickened in pockets. The stairwell doors were hot to the touch in places. Jonas's men, 12 firefighters and one officer in their group, stayed tight, checking faces and air, counting each other in the dark. With them was a civilian woman, Josephine Harris, a middle-aged building employee who had helped firefighters keep their bearings when visibility dropped to almost nothing. She knew the layout better than anyone in that stairwell, and she stayed close, guiding them through turns and doors and telling them where the stairwell tightened and where it opened. A little before 10 a.m., Jonas's crew reached Stairwell B near the high 20s, pausing on a landing to catch breath and wait for instructions. Radios were chaotic. The other tower, the South Tower, had also been struck at 9:03 a.m., and the situation across the complex was rapidly collapsing into something no one could control. Then, at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower came down. Inside the North Tower, the shock traveled through concrete and steel like a blunt force hit. The stairs shuddered, lights flickered, and dust sifted down in a steady fall. Jonas knew the building wasn't stable the way it had been minutes earlier. He made the call to descend. The men were exhausted, sweaty under layers of turnout gear, and the smoke was getting worse. They started down, one step at a time, keeping a hand on the railing so no one vanished in the dark. Harris stayed with them, calm in a way that steadied the group, insisting they keep moving and stick to the center of the core. They didn't know they were walking into the narrow window between life and death. At 10:28 a.m., the roar returned, louder, closer, and then the staircase pitched. Concrete popped like gunfire. The handrail vibrated under Jonas's grip. In that split second, the North Tower began to collapse. The force hit like a giant fist. The stairwell walls folded, and the air went violent, a blast of dust and debris that stole the oxygen. Jonas was knocked down and shoved into darkness. Around him, men yelled names, coughed, tried to find each other by touch. For a moment, there was nothing but the grinding sound of a building tearing itself apart, steel screaming, concrete pulverizing, a long, sustained thunder that seemed like it would never end. Then it stopped. Silence followed, so total it felt unreal. Jonas called out. One by one, voices answered, hoarse, stunned, alive. Their small pocket of Stairwell B had held together. It wasn't intact like a normal staircase, but it hadn't been flattened. They were buried inside the remains of the tower, but they weren't crushed. Some were bleeding. Some couldn't hear well through the dust and concussion. But the group was together. Firefighters pressed shoulder to shoulder in darkness, Harris right there with them, the air gritty and thin, the floor under them no longer a floor so much as a tilted platform of broken structure. Elsewhere in the wreckage, other people survived in different voids. Port Authority police officers John McLaughlin and Will Jimeno had been in the underground concourse area when the South Tower fell, and then the North Tower followed. The collapses buried them under layers of concrete, rebar, and twisted steel. They were pinned in place, injured, unable to move, relying on each other's voices to stay conscious. They could hear muffled machinery and distant shouts, proof that rescuers were above them, but the sound also meant time, and time was the enemy. In the North Tower itself, a civilian office worker named Pasquale Buzelli survived when the structure failed around him. He later described losing consciousness as the building came down, then waking up on a slab amid the ruins, stunned that he was still breathing. Another survivor, Janelle Guzman McMillan, had been descending stairs when the collapse swallowed her. She was trapped deep in the debris for more than a day, pressed by weight she couldn't lift, answering whenever she heard rescuers calling, forcing her voice out through dust and pain because she understood that silence would let the site forget she was there. For Jonas's group, survival depended on making sense of the darkness. They felt their way through broken walls and twisted landings, looking for any opening that might lead up and out. Dust coated their mouths and throats. Their helmets and jackets were caked with gray powder. They had no clear path, only instinct, stubbornness, and the discipline that kept them working even when the building around them had been reduced to fragments. After hours inside the wreckage, they found a way upward. It wasn't a stairwell anymore. It was a jagged tunnel of shattered concrete and bent metal, but it climbed. Hands reached for anything solid. Boots searched for footing. When they finally emerged, they didn't step out onto a street. They stepped onto the top of the rubble pile where the North Tower had stood, surrounded by a landscape of debris, alarms, and thick dust hanging in the air. The skyline they had known was gone. Firefighters and medics stared because people did not walk out of a collapsed tower, not after what everyone had just watched happen. For McLaughlin and Jimeno, rescue came slower. Searchers worked through the night, listening for tapping, for voices, for any sign of life under the ruins. When rescuers finally reached Jimeno, they pulled him free first, carving space inch by inch. McLaughlin was deeper, pinned harder, and it took longer to reach him. Both men were removed alive after many hours beneath the rubble, battered and broken, but alive. Janelle Guzman McMillan was found after roughly 27 hours beneath the North Tower's debris. She had been trapped in darkness, crushed by weight she couldn't lift, and she survived by refusing to stop answering when someone called into the rubble. When she was freed, it was one of the rare moments at Ground Zero when exhausted crews heard a living voice and kept digging until they reached it. The stairwell survivors didn't describe what happened to them as luck. They talked about position, timing, and inches, a landing that held, a wall that didn't give way, a decision to descend when they did. On a morning when 2 skyscrapers were reduced to rubble in less than 2 hours, a handful of people were still able to answer when someone called into the dust and asked, "Is anybody there?" Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.